Hey everybody, welcome to World History. Today we're doing section 4. So go ahead and get your notes out and let's get started. So today we're talking about how the Reformation's ideas spread to the rest of Europe. So Protestant sects developed all across Europe. Sects are specific religious groups that have broken away from an established church. We've already talked about two, being the Lutherans and the Calvinists. There's a third one we're going to talk about, the Anabaptists, who rejected the idea of infant baptism. They believed that you should not baptize your infant, that child should wait until they are of an age to make that decision for themselves and then be baptized. They also wanted to abolish private property. And out of all the groups that we talk about in terms of the Reformation, they preached religious toleration and separation of church and state. Now, the Anabaptists will eventually morph into the Baptists that we have today. Now, in England, we've got a good old Henry VIII, known as the defender of the faith against the Protestant revolt, until he needed a male heir. For those of you familiar with the musical Six, you're probably going to know a lot of this information I'm about to share. Now, in most monarchies, you needed a male heir to pass on the throne when you died. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon from Spain, had originally been wed to his older brother, but he died. So then she had to wait until he turned 18. Then they got married, and Catherine at this point was unable to provide a male heir. They did have a daughter, though, Mary Tudor. We'll talk about her later. Henry then begins to seek an annulment, essentially a oops, all berries, this marriage didn't happen, from the Pope. The request was denied for the fear of offending the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, Catherine's nephew. It's important to note Catherine came from a major royal family, that being the Spanish royal throne. So realistically, annulling the marriage to Catherine would have thrown England into an issue with Spain and by extension the rest of Europe. Now, in order to do that, to get what he wanted, he took control of the church and establishes the Church of England, or the Anglican Church, and appoints Thomas Cranmer as Archbishop. Cranmer grants the annulment, so Catherine is out and is almost sent to a nunnery by her husband, and he marries Anne Boleyn, and things were fine for now. In 1534, he passed the Act of Supremacy, passed by Parliament, and that he was the only supreme head on earth of the Church of England. Catholics that did not accept this were executed. This included people like Thomas More, who refused to accept it, but was later canonized or recognized as a saint by the Catholic Church. Now, just kind of give you a breakdown of the map of Europe at the moment, with all of our different religions running around at the moment. So in 1533, he marries Anne Boleyn, his mistress, and they have a daughter, Elizabeth I, probably by far one of the most famous queens in all of English history. Now, Anne is also unable to provide a son. Henry then's like, I'm going to divorce you and marry my mistress, Jane Seymour. But the church wasn't willing to give him another divorce, so he accused Anne of witchcraft and adultery. And as it goes in the musical, don't lose your head, because she did. Now, he'll marry 4 more times. He had 6 wives. His third wife, Jane Seymour, did provide a son, Edward, who takes the throne at the age of 9 and tries to make England a Protestant country. He'll die in his early teens. Jane will actually die in childbirth, giving birth to Edward. With no male heir to carry out Henry's desire for a stable monarchy, it then passes on to his daughters. But before we do that, I do want to not skip over the other 3 wives and talk about them as well. So we've already talked about Catherine, Anne, and Jane. We then have Anne, or Anna of Cleves, as it would have been said in German, known as the Flanders mare by Henry, because he alleges that she catfished him. Because her portrait that was painted by Hans Holbein didn't look anything like her. So he got an annulment and claimed her as the king's dear sister. So she actually lived a pretty good life for the rest of her life. She actually would live long enough to see Elizabeth I ascend to the throne. We then have Catherine Howard, who is Anne Boleyn's cousin, and they get married and all this stuff. And then allegedly she do the deed with her brother. So she was then found guilty of witchcraft and adultery and also lost her head. Catherine Parr, the final wife, actually survived Henry and would actually die a year and a half later. Said that she got remarried the day he died. A great way to remember this is there are three Catherines, two Annes, and a Jane, or divorce beheaded died, divorce beheaded survived. You'll actually be doing an extra credit opportunity with Six the Musical today. So, like I said, Mary Tudor comes to power. Uh, she's Edward's half sister and daughter of Henry and Catherine of Aragon, and proposes returning England to the Catholic faith and executes Protestants. She is known as Bloody Mary because she loved to see the blood of Protestants when they had their heads chopped off. Now, she'd die in 1558, shortly after taking the throne, and her sister would then be on the throne for the next 25 years. Elizabeth I, the daughter of Henry and Anne Boleyn, and she brought about a compromise, or an acceptable middle ground, between Protestantism and Catholicism practices, reunifying England, and England becomes a more tolerant Protestant nation. And it was actually still within realms to be acceptable for those that practiced Catholicism. Now, at the same time, as the Reformation is taking place, the church is putting on their own counter revolution, or the counter Reformation, in which they attempted to revive their own moral authority, end corruption, and increase support of the church. Basically, they were taking Luther's ideas and claiming them as their own. So in 1545, we'll have the Council of Trent, and they decide on a direction of reforms. They met on and off for about 20 years, and they reaffirmed the traditional Catholic views. Things like salvation comes through faith and good works. The Bible is not the only source of our faith. They established schools, and they put out penalties for corruption among clergy. Essentially, they got rid of those indulgences. Now, along with this, we'll have the founding of the Jesuits by Ignatius of Loyola, which translates to soldier for God, and the Jesuits are known as the Society of Jesus. It's a new religious order within the Catholic Church. Their job was to defend and spread Catholic faith through spiritual and moral discipline and rigorous religious training. We also have Teresa of Avila, who was a major symbol of renewed, intense faith, and actually established her own order of nuns. She reformed a lot of Spanish convents and made sure that writings were kept to be important, including the Way of Perfection, which she wrote herself. Now, a legacy of the entire Reformation, it's a majority of Europe remained Catholic. However, there were changes made. A lot more people were embracing charity, and church abuses were reduced overall. Now, that being said, there was also a lot of widespread persecution directed at people that were not part of the mainstream. It was due to the heightened religious passion of the times, radical sects would be persecuted. Groups like the Anabaptists, Jewish people, and witches. This is really the period in history where we start to see a lot more mentions of witches being burned at the stake or hanged, or Jews being forcibly expelled out of cities. So, yeah, we got to talk about the witch hunts. They're centers of religious conflict. They believed witches were agents of the devil, usually women, and that believers of Christianity and magic were social outcasts, midwives, herbalists. Anybody that was thought to be different was considered to be a witch. In terms of Jewish persecution, a lot of Jewish people were pressured to convert to Christianity. A lot of them were sent to the ghettos or separate quarters of the city. We'll talk a lot more about Jewish ghettos when we get to World War II. And in a lot of cases, they were also expelled from cities and countries. All right, that's going to do it for notes for today. You have an extra credit opportunity you can do over Six the Musical and a reflection over the Reformation today. I'll see y'all next time.